Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Pause Reviews podcast, the podcast where Tim and I watch as much as humanly possible to try to sift through the crap and bring you things and options, choices, curated titles of movies so that you can have something awesome to watch tonight. As always, I'm your host, Frank, joined by my trusty co-host, Tim.
If you think about streaming services as if they were a buffet, I mean, I know buffets are kind of maybe a thing of the past now, but you know, we've tried all of the food in the buffet,
right,
and we're just gonna like put a little star next to the ones you should eat.
Yeah, it's basically the pudding.
Yeah,
there's nothing like buffet pudding
or soft serve.
Oh, dude, and a Chinese buffet.
Yeah,
where
crab
you
legs.
Where you get the see. This is how people can tell, right? Like, there's Tim and I are kind of the reverse of many things, right? I'm sweet mocha brown. He's white. Yep. I've got hair on the sides. He's got hair on the top.
Yep.
I'm fat. He's thin-ish. And he's thin by American standards.
Yeah.
I think, and this is why, like, you're like, ooh, crab legs, ooh, and I'm just like, those Chinese donuts, like the Chinese food donuts with the pudding, bro, game changer.
Yeah.
Man, I used to be thin, too.
Yeah.
It's so funny, right? I used to eat like that, and I was like 4% body fat.
Right.
And now...
I'd love to talk to my, like, even just 10 years ago self and be like, no, it's going to happen.
You know what I would tell myself? I would just say, well, 10 years ago me wasn't much better. But, like, if I could go back to when I was awesome, I would just be like, make sure you look at yourself more. Like, just walk around shirtless more.
Yeah.
Because this is a treasure. Take more pictures.
Yeah.
And I like how I wouldn't say, keep it up, buddy. You need it for your health. It's worth it in the end. I would just be like, take a picture so when the inevitable happens, you've got something to look at.
Wear less baseball hats because you're going to have a huge bald spot in the back soon.
Is that true? Maybe that's why I'm bald.
No, that's an old wives' tale, but I'm just saying, like, you know, I would have appreciated that part of my hair more now that it's
Dude, I had
gone.
Flowing locks. Anyways, we're not here to talk about our gorgeous hair before it all fell out or our tight waistbands before it all exploded. We're here to talk about another kind of explosion. God, that's a horrible transition.
No, we're not talking about diarrhea.
We're talking... I wish. We're talking about the Netflix original film, The Siege of Jadotville.
Yeah.
And what are the specs? So this movie was released in 2016. Now, it opened up in a film festival. It had a very limited run in theaters. So, you know, we're not going to cover all the specs we normally do, right? Budget doesn't really matter because we don't really have firm numbers or really accurate numbers to what this would have done. It's just not apples and apples, right? Like this is just not normal, right? But what we do know is it's rated TVMA because it's for a streaming service, right? So it's got the TV ratings on it. Released in 2016, and it's a war drama. Directed by Richie Smythe. So Richie Smythe has done this movie and then like U2 and the Verb videos. He's a music video director who legitimately got the nod for this movie and hasn't done a movie since.
That's crazy.
At least not that I could find. So I don't know. That's interesting to me that he, you know, it just sometimes you'll see like maybe this is the launch of a career. Maybe he's making a switch, and also too maybe he's done some type of music videos. Who like I could see like a music video director doing Fast and the Furious, a music video director doing like there's a certain genre of movie that you could see those skills and that stylistic approach serving well cinematically. This is certainly not one of them.
No, this was probably the furthest thing from a music video that you could possibly pull together.
Now, he is Irish, right? He's done a lot of
Well,
Irish band
that
videos.
answers that.
So maybe this is something that's close to his heart, something that he grew up with, whatever. But again, it's, a fascinating leap. Now, the screenplay is written by Kevin Broadbent, and Kevin Broadbent does have a few credits to his name. And I would say probably the two most recognizable titles of the, 4 or 5 writing credits he has is The Glimmerman and Constantine, the Keanu Reeves version.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see, what else? Film is based on the book by Declan Powers. Declan Powers is a career military guy. He served as, Secretary of Defense or whatever in Ireland. So he wrote the book, The Siege of Jadotville, which is what the film is based on. And so, again, if you're looking for more, that probably is a great read. As we've made abundantly clear, we don't read books. Right. So we'll just stick to the movie for now. Rotten Tomatoes. I was surprised.
Yeah.
Genuinely surprised. Another classic situation where the audience score is a little bit higher than the critic score, but the critic score is 64% for this movie. Audience score 74%, which I feel like is closer to the low end of what I would expect.
I agree wholeheartedly. We'll kind of get into it a little bit, but the quality is there for me for sure, especially considering that this is a Netflix original. Especially, again, on the heels of covering a Netflix original last week in the Rewind episode in Army of the Dead.
Oof. Yeah, that one was rough. Yeah, I mean, yes, and I think you're right. I think as we discuss and break down this movie a little bit, we'll highlight a few reasons as to why critics probably weren't feeling it as much, and perhaps why. I mean, this is, I would argue, a perfect example where if you are the type of person who only goes off critic scores, you're going to do yourself a disservice on this one.
Yeah, I mean, if you are basing it off of that, maybe basing it off reviews, although some reviews were actually more positive than others, or even, maybe finding this buried down the list of Netflix, and you just kind of, it looks, the cover has got Jamie Dornan doing his, just kind of Dornan, doing his kind of brooding, I'm holding a big gun kind of look. Looks a fairly unassuming kind of movie. Right?
Yeah, you know what? It's so funny that you say that. At first glance, this certainly feels like a second or third tier Netflix original movie.
Yeah.
And kind of one of those things man, did they sneak Jamie Dornan in before he became Jamie Dornan? Right? But it is. It's kind of an unassuming movie, just sort of sitting there. And it's not one that gets a lot of billing when Netflix does, as they rarely do, talk about, sort of their prouder moments, their bigger titles, whatever. But this movie is certainly something special and not second tier at all. I would argue this is among Netflix's best original programming.
Yeah, ultimately I was really shocked, I guess. I mean, shocked might be strong, but reminding myself, especially as you got into the heavy battle scenes, not that they're huge by any war movie standard. We're not talking the opening scenes of Private Ryan or Pearl Harbor or something like that.
Right.
But I kind of had to be this is a Netflix movie, right? There was a quality to it that I wasn't seeing. Again, going back to last week, Army of the Dead. Yes, there was a lot of money and big names attached to it, but the makeup was lousy. The zombies were unimpressive. The visual effects weren't anything to write home about. I didn't feel like there was any drawback to this, and the acting in this is superb. Again, compared to the garbage that we saw last week, Dornan and who's the other
Jason O'Mara?
Yeah, they're the biggest names in this, but it does not suffer from a lack
Well,
of
and
acting chops.
Mark Strong.
Mark Strong, that's who I'm thinking of. But it doesn't suffer. There's not once in this movie I'm like, oh, where'd they get these guys, right? Like, they were all very quality in the roles that they played.
No, I completely and totally agree. So let's dive in. And as always, word of warning, spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the movie yet, you don't dig spoilers, go see it. And then come back, because we're going to talk about some stuff. All right, so what is this movie about? The IMDb synopsis is Irish Commandant Pat Quinlan leads a standoff with troops against French and Belgian mercenaries. Did I say that right? Leads a standoff with... Yeah. Frank Reed good. Irish Commandant Pat Quinlan leads a standoff with troops against French and Belgian mercenaries in the Congo during the early 1960s. Essentially, we are dropped into a narrative where we see the province, the area, the region of Katanga in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has has exercised a coup, right, and to try to secede from the Congo and establish themselves as their own independent country, their own independent power, because they are mineral rich, right? So out of all of Africa, out of all of the Congo, out of all the world, you find the highest concentrations of essentially every mineral on Earth, including uranium, which is used to create all of our weapons of mass destruction. How does that come?
Specifically, the two bombs used to end World War II by the American forces.
Exactly. So the bombs dropped on Japan were made with uranium mined in the Congo, and particularly in the Katanga region. Why is this so critical, so important? This takes place in 1961. So the U.S. and the USSR are in the throes of the Cold War, the arms race, the nuclearization of the world, and the Congo, and particularly Katanga, holds the greatest, biggest, epicest vein of uranium in the world.
So if you're not seeing dollar signs, you're not following along.
Right. So, and keep that in mind, because we're going to circle back to that when we give some critiques of areas of this movie that could have been done much better. So now that there's civil unrest and there is this bubbling civil war just on the brink in Congo, the newly established, and by newly, right, a couple of years in existence, maybe a decade or so, but certainly not on the world stage quite yet as they are today. But the UN steps in to send a peacekeeping mission into the Congo to try to keep things from boiling over. And the troops selected to be that force are the Irish Army. The Irish Army is newly formed. The Irish have recently gained independence from the UK. And so while Irish shoulders, while Irish soldiers, like Folgers, while Irish soldiers have served in all the world wars and in all combat that the UK has been a part of, this will be the first time that the Irish Army goes on an international deployment as their own independent armed force. And so we come into the story. Jamie Dornan plays the commandant of this force. Jason O'Mara is his lieutenant and second in command. And Mark Strong plays an Irish, I don't know what, for the UN.
Yeah, he was some sort of delegate, I guess, that was then tapped by the Secretary General to be the man on the ground.
Right. He's kind of he's the brains behind the operation in the Congo.
Yeah, you get a sense, as you said, like this is very, this is in the infancy of the UN, and they're still trying to figure out exactly how they operate in these world theaters and what their role is and how much they can affect the outcome of things. it almost feels nefarious.
And they make a strong play for that, right?
Yes.
This movie really villainizes, and arguably rightfully so, really villainizes Mark Strong's character, as well as the general who is his kind of minion on the ground. Yeah. And, to really play up the injustice that was done to this Irish regiment, this Irish company.
Yep.
And so, so speaking of the injustice and all these kind of things, this movie wants to be a lot of things, right? There's political theater there. There is, certainly a political drama, this whole notion of the Cold War and the time and place and what's at stake and what's on the table, right? But rather than focusing on the game as a whole or even much at all, this movie really narrows its focus on this particular story and the achievements of this Irish company, on the ground in the town of Jadotville, which is one of the major towns in Katanga.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, you threw this one out there. We hadn't done a fact versus fiction in a while, right? Based on true story. How much does this get right? So I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I literally went into this with nothing. I knew the name, and we talked briefly, and I settled in, and probably 10, 15 minutes in, at least, by the time we met A Company and the Irish soldiers, now I can't say it.
I believe it's pronounced shoulders, Tim. I believe that's the Gaelic pronunciation.
I'm stuck with it now. And now all I can picture is the beige Ireland bands that they wore on their shoulders. Oh, God damn it!
On their soldiers, Tim.
Anyway, I knew almost immediately. I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna love this," because this has got some classic setup for me in terms of military movies that I like. Right? It's that ragtag or unseasoned group of men that are put into an untenable situation, and they're gonna fight to the bitter end. This was. If you've seen the 90s movie Gettysburg, that hours long epic, at the end of what is generally considered the first part is the Battle of Little Round Top, where Jeff Daniels plays Lawrence Chamberlain, the last line of the Union Army, and he cannot withdraw from the top of Little Round Top or Gettysburg, and therefore many considered the Union to be lost. And they charge down the mountain with bayonets drawn because they run out of ammunition because the Confederate soldiers charged them so many times. The end of any movie that's the Alamo, right? Particularly for me, the Disney Davy Crockett King of the Wild Frontier, where you have Fess Parker swinging his gun wildly as the Mexican troops pour up the steps, and slaughter everyone around him. It's those against all odds moments. I just have a soft spot for those movies. Like there's something in it. So I was hooked from the beginning.
So I think that's the perfect segue into what is this movie? This movie is based on actual events.
Yeah.
And to go a step further, when it comes to the actual combat moments and that narrative in this movie is spot on. Like, to probably arguably one of the most historically accurate representations of a battle that have probably ever been put on film, and that is because so many of the men who were there are still surviving. There were lots of records of what had happened, and so a lot really went in. A lot of care and love and attention went into telling this story. Why is this siege so important? Right? We talked a little bit about the background and the theater of it, but why this in particular? Again, these Irish troops were totally green to battle as their own independent force. Yep. And we are, and I apologize because I didn't really look it up, but my understanding is the commandant himself, Commandant Quinlan, is also not really. None of them have been tested in battle yet, right?
Right.
So
I mean, a couple of these guys were not even of age to serve. Some of them had falsified their birth certificates and were actually like 15 and a half years old. Right. So consider that. They are 15 and a half years old, being sent from Ireland, probably have never left Ireland, and they're going to the Congo. Like, seriously?
Right. So the Irish troops hit the ground, and immediately in Jadotville are met with horrible conditions, right? Their post, right? Their outpost is dilapidated. There are no provisions. They have nothing. The weapons are outdated. Ammunition is scarce.
State of the art for World War II.
Right. And so they inherit a bad situation. They're exposed on all sides. There's 157 men who are sent to this post and ordered to hold it, as the mining companies and the other companies who are moving and pushing to protect the interests of the mine and Katanga's independence so that they can make bargains and deals and keep things commercial, right, to bring in money and stuff for their resources. The UN, much like the Congo, is trying to maintain order, and the previous administration, which was to not privatize, but to keep the mines and the resources of the Congo for the Congo. Yeah. And so that is an immediate threat to these mining companies who are trying to be there and make money. So they hire these mercenaries to come, and it is made clear that the UN troops are not wanted there. Yep. And so the siege begins. These mercenaries and the Congolese sort of, rebels, right? Essentially, they just the loyalists, right? So they come in waves to Jadotville and trying to kill off these guys. And 157 Irish soldiers fended off 3,000 mercenaries and enemy troops, while suffering 0 casualties, while taking 300 lives. Yep. And they held it for days without provision, without reinforcement, until they ran out of ammunition and they ran out of water and could no longer hold the defense and surrendered. Now, this act of surrender leaves the Irish not seen as heroes, right? It made the whole situation, and there's a whole lot of other things that play into this, but the UN comes out of this looking horrible. Yep. The Irish come out as cowards, and so everything is swept under the rug. From 1961 until 2005, the men involved in this heroic stand are treated as cowards. They're called the Jadotville Jacks, and everything that they've done is swept under the rug. They receive no medals. They receive no commendations. They receive no anything. And it isn't until 2005 when the Irish government recognizes, I guess they go back and reevaluate things. They they find them without fault, right? Like, great, thanks. We needed that. We knew we weren't, you idiots. Right. And then they are finally treated as heroes and given a plaque outside their military institution. And this movie.
Not only that, I mean, they talk about Quinlan's actions are cited in military textbooks now all over the world as examples of certain types of military defense, in unenviable situations like that. But yeah, I mean, a bunch of these guys died before they were ever vindicated for what they went through, all to save face for the UN, right? They were all just kind of thrown under the bus for the way that the UN mishandles that. And you see that mishandling of the beginning of these operations in the opening half hour of this movie.
Absolutely. So let's start zeroing in on a few things. Number one, let's focus on the good. What makes this movie good? What works? You mentioned a couple of things. I heard production value, et cetera. So let's jump off with you, Tim. Yeah. What works in this movie?
I think first off, you've got a story, right? A story that needs to be told.
So compelling.
And it is an absolutely compelling story. Like I said, I was hooked from the minute. You've got these underdogs that are up against these horrible situations, and in a time where we're very familiar with the way that geopolitical things play out, and you're not doing the moral or the right thing with your resources, right? You're essentially sacrificing these 150 some men, for the greater good of this operation or whatever. There's just there's so much in that. There's so much heart in that. There's so much emotion in that. I was very wrapped up in that this story by the end. I think you had told me you're going to prepare to be mad, and I was so angry because these men were honored to do this job, right? Ireland was chosen to do this because they said they're not a nation of conquerors, right? They're not a nation that has ever set to own another nation, and so they are peacekeepers. That's where we're going to get our peacekeeping forces from, and they are sent to do this, a noble job, and they're not wanted there, and they're just left to fend for themselves against an army that seemingly has every advantage. They have an old jet plane. They have major artillery. They have bazookas. Like, they are outmanned and outgunned to a T. And so you just get wrapped up in the heart of this story. And you know how this is going to end, but I don't think it ends the way that you expect it to, right? And again, spoilers, I very much am seeing these young guys, there's some scenes of them in a bar early on, and they're kind of carrying on their first morning, waking up on the roof of their barracks in Africa. And you're like, oh, they're all going to be dead soon. Like, they're all going to get wiped out. They're going to go the way of Davy Crockett, right? Like, there'll be nobody left at the Alamo.
Or 300.
Right, exactly. There'll be none left. They all make it. It is super surprising.
Every single one. No injuries, yes.
Yeah.
No casualties.
And that sort of goes against your brain as a movie watching person, right? You're like, you're just so convinced that half of these guys have to die, right? Because that's how you write a movie, right? Mm-hmm. Get attached to some of these guys, and none of them die. Like, it's stranger than fiction, right? Like, it truly is.
Yeah.
And so a great story. And yeah, production value wise, like I never once felt like I was watching anything but a first rate, Netflix movie. And that even sounds derogatory when I say Netflix movie.
Sounds like a bit of a qualifier. It's like, right. the Flight of the Conchords song. Right. You're the most beautiful girl in the room.
Yeah,
it's like, this is the greatest movie Netflix has made.
Right. And that sounds so derogatory, and I don't mean that, because I if you had seen this when it came out, it had a limited run, but it also premiered at the
Irish Film Festival, the Galway Film Festival.
The Galway. I was going to say Edinburgh. That's a fringe festival.
And it's in Scotland, Tim.
That's true.
Scotland's a different place. That's where shoulders come from. How many countries are in this country?
There were so many countries in this movie that were fighting each other that I didn't think should be fighting each other. I'm very confused. Like the Belgians and the French.
Is he French?
Right.
What is happening? Why are the French everywhere?
Except their own country. But it's like I said,
is that Colonel Sanders? Dude, if you watch the movie, you'll get it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Mama says. Anyway, but no, you get a good movie, and it's very surprising coming from where it's coming from. And again, off the heels of something we watched last week that was just the bottom of the barrel in terms of Netflix produced movies, right?
I don't know. Holiday was there too.
That's true. That's very, very true. What was the third thing?
I don't know. Production value. I would say acting.
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I don't know if I'm not saying that was your third thing, but for me, that was, you touched on the compelling storyline. Given, right?
Yep.
A given.
Yep.
This is one of those things that when you hear about it, like if you listen to a podcast and you hear this story, or you read a magazine article or a news article or whatever, and some story you've never heard before, and all of a sudden, what's the first thing you say? You say like, wow, how is there not a movie about that?
Right.
That is this story, right? Yep. Somebody finally heard about it and was like, how is this not a movie? And it makes the movie and it plays out. I mean, production value is excellent. And I would say certainly among the best that Netflix has. But arguably it stands up to almost any other wartime drama. So it's stunning in that regard. You talked about this, the storyline and that kind of stuff, that's kind of what we said, right? The compelling nature of the story, that almost writes itself. Then you talk about, because they're really just telling you what these men actually did, which was nothing short of pure heroism.
And again, I want to you touched on it, but I just want to emphasize this. This movie and the book, they like are ripped from the logs that they kept, right?
Oh yeah.
There's a scene in the movie where they talk about because of the lack of a response they're getting from the general and the UN High Command, Quinlan says, from now on, everything that is said is written down. So everything, every step of the way, every communique that they have is word for word notated. So this is not strayed from the truth at all. This is written down as it happened.
And this is key because, right, like obviously if the UN is trying to hide this and Ireland is embarrassed, this log was smuggled out, I believe, by the radio operator himself.
Yes.
And so that log existed among the troop so that when this was time to be made, I think it was the author, maybe even the director, had reached out to just say, hey, man, if you guys have any information that would help us to really tell this honestly, whatever, they provided them with the radio log. And so, again, so much love and care given to this portrayal. And then we talk about the acting, and we'll lump the casting into that as well.
Yeah.
The Irish troops, with the exception of Mark Strong, he plays an Irishman, but Jason O'Mara, what's his face? Damn, what's his name? What's 50 Shades of Grey? Jamie Dornan.
Jamie Dornan.
Jason O'Mara, Jamie Dornan, top tier Irish actors who came in to tell an Irish story of heroism. An Irish director who comes in, man, I'm assuming that, I think it's true. We'll have an errors and omissions if it's not, right? But these are Ireland's native sons coming together to tell a story about Ireland's greatest heroes, arguably, in one of their most heroic moments that has been a sense of, that has just been this shame on the country, but not because of their actions, but because of how it was handled. To bring light to this, to shed truth on this, to shed light, right? I mixed that up, but to bring truth in there, to shed light, right? This is, you can feel the care, attention, and love that is paid to the story. It comes through the words, it comes through the filmmaking. This director is not a film director, and it doesn't hinder it. It is solely because you can really feel everyone involved believed that this is a story that needed to be told. And that influenced all of it, but the acting is stellar. You hate Mark Strong because he's a total bag of dicks, right? Yep. And you are you're glued to the screen when Dornan and O'Mara are on screen and handling these unimaginable odds.
Even the opposition General Sambe, he's so charismatic.
That's exactly the word I was thinking.
You don't even hate him. Like, he's kind of funny and charming.
But you also hate Mark Strong so much. That you're like, dude, this guy looks like a good guy compared to the UN.
Exactly. And I think one of the cool things, and I don't know if this is what landed him the role solely, but Quinlan's actual son said that Dornan bore an uncanny resemblance to him and got everything about him right, with the exception of his accent. And that's simply because his accent was so thick, with what they call a Kerry accent, that they would have needed to subtitle him had he actually tried to replicate the actual accent.
Yeah,
but
Quinlan famously had a crazy
yeah.
accent.
But his own son said that he was an uncanny resemblance to him. So
yeah. And it's, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's wishful thinking. He looks just like my dad, and I look just like my dad. Hashtag I'm Jamie Dornan, ladies. Yeah, and that's true. And now Jamie Dornan is Northern Irish, right? So he's, the accent is slightly different. But anyways, again, it's absolutely amazing. Another fun fact, since we're talking about casting, Pat Quinlan's, Commandant Quinlan's grandson is one of the soldiers in this movie, Connor Quinlan. So that's kind of a fun fact. Now, so all this stuff is the stuff that works, the stuff that makes this movie so incredible and magical. And I want to be clear before we kind of shift gears into the last two things that we want to talk about, which is maybe what doesn't work, and then also fact versus fiction. How close does this come to accuracy? I want to make clear that this movie is excellent and absolutely worth your watch. And with that, what doesn't work? I think for me, and I'll throw this to you, Tim, and you let me know what you think. I think that as much care and attention as was paid to the story of the siege itself, right? It felt very much like they exhausted all resources there and paid very little attention to the bigger picture and the bigger story and the why, right? You could easily find yourself watching this movie totally gobsmacked, mesmerized, and captivated by the story of Commandant Quinlan and his men and what they accomplished on that battlefield. But you will find yourself, I would argue, you would find yourself asking yourself, why? Why is this even happening? Why are they there? Why is this a big deal? Why are these men trying to kill them? You are, right, if you watch this movie and you pay attention, the answers are there through exposition, subtext, and sometimes straight up on-screen text. But it isn't really built up and sort of put front and center to really ground this movie. I think this movie, as I said earlier, it tries to be, or thinks it is, many things, and many of those things is what it should have been. What it ends up feeling like at times is an untethered war drama with these incredible scenes, in the combat scenes, and very captivating acting amongst the soldiers, but then a very disjointed narrative outside of that, which really ground the movie and give it its purpose. And I think that being lost is a real shame, because this movie is not only captivating because of what these men did, it's also fascinating by why they had to do what they did and all the things that played into this. The world's superpowers competing, essentially, leaving these men out to dry, not wanting to overcommit themselves because, right, as much as the U.S. or Russia don't want civil war in the Congo and don't want to have to risk their men to maintain peace and etc., they're super biased. They like the unrest, and they don't want the Congo to take those minerals off the table because we're buying 70% of them, right? It makes up 80% of our minerals in the United States, and et cetera, right? So there's so much political intrigue that is ignored and kind of put forth as an afterthought. And I think as a result as well, when the battle is over, the movie just sort of fizzles out.
Yeah, you lose a lot of steam. I mean, you lose all steam essentially. We are left with just a few minutes of narration over a few scenes, and this wasn't the end of their story. This was the end of their biggest story. They saw a few more months of combat. They did a full 6 month tour. They spent about 5 of that in jail. But this was
5
the
weeks.
first
5 weeks.
5 weeks in jail. And they, this was the first. The siege was the first couple of days, that they were in Jadotville. But they saw more battles after this. They saw more fighting as this, unrest continued. They were a part of a prisoner exchange. They played out some more until they were eventually replaced and sent home in December. But they were there starting in September, and there is more on a grand geopolitical scale, and I would have liked to have seen how more of this plays out. You get some of the postscript, that kind of gives you a rundown of what happened, but I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of General Sambe, getting run out of town and getting his, and we're just kind of left hanging, like they told the story they wanted to tell and they were done with it, and that is not necessarily a bad thing,
sure,
because again, they told that story very, very well. But as a movie, this is one of those situations where I could appreciate a little bit more Hollywoodization of the story, right? Just a little padding. Give me a little bit more.
Well, what you want is a little bit more context.
Yeah.
And you want to set the world a little bit. And you want to really understand, right? Like when we go to sit down and watch a movie, it's great to see the hero do the hero's work, right? But what adds that compelling element is to know why. Why is this conflict happening? Why is this hero facing these obstacles?
I was sort of only kidding. I wasn't exactly kidding before when I was laughing about not knowing all these, like, why we, as in the UN or the story that we're following in this case.
Right.
Why is the UN fighting French-backed mercenaries? Didn't the Irish and the Allies fight with the French in World War II? Not 10 years earlier than this? Like. Why is Belgium against the UN forces at this point? Like, Russia plays
because the UN is against Belgium's interests in the Congo.
Right?
And that's exactly it. Is like, I think the production team involved in this, they really zeroed in, right? Mm-hmm. As I said, as much as can be said for homegrown Hollywood folk telling a homegrown story and shedding light on this injustice, not a lot of care and attention was given outside of that specific targeted view. Mm-hmm. And that is, and again, like you said, that is the main point, right? To really bring these men into the forefront and put them on display for what they did.
Yep.
However, the context, it adds to why it was so important, so amazing. Everything was working against them. Not just their ill provisions and all this kind of stuff, but the UN is working against, because the UN is in a delicate balance of trying to establish themselves in the world, and the US is against them without being against, right? But they're indifferent because they don't want to overstep, because they don't want to hurt their own interests. But at the same time, they also need to, right? And all of this, it makes the odds against them even more insurmountable. Right now, the focus is like, man, this 157 guys had to take on 3,000. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's super tough. But they were effectively taking on the freaking world, right? Yeah. Everything that could be working against them was, and that's lost. And in a lot of ways, this movie ends up feeling like parents who have kids and don't focus on themselves because they're so hyper-focused on the kids, and then when the kids leave, they have nothing else to talk about. And this movie felt like once the story of the Siege of Jadotville ended, they didn't know what else to talk about, and they didn't wrap it up well. It just fizzles. It feels rushed in the end, right? It's almost like, they go to jail, but that seems like a minor inconvenience. right? They come out of there, they're just as happy, healthy, clean shaven as when they went in, and then they're home. General gets punched in the face, everyone salutes Jamie Dornan, and that's great, but there's more, right?
Yeah.
What about more of the aftermath? What happens in the Congo? How, there's when you're going to put forth a story like this, you got to tie up the ends, and I feel like that's where this movie lacks.
And ultimately, to kind of put a point on that, we just don't have the benefit of the context that we have as if this was set in World War II or the American Civil War or the Revolution, where
absolutely,
I know who the bad guys are, I know who the good guys are, I know how this ends in the end. You can throw me into a snapshot because I've got all the pieces already set. I did have to rewind a couple times. There's a scene between Sambe and a Belgian general, and he's like, I think he was a Belgian
the confidence
general.
is dripping.
Well, and I had to rewatch it a couple times because I wasn't sure what was happening there.
And it sounds like you need to watch it one more time.
Right? And I was like, I rewound it at least twice when I first watched it, and then I've watched the movie fully a third time. And I'm like, who are they? What is the deal that he's making here? Because I don't have those pieces in play.
Right.
And, and again, the infancy of the UN and their actions feeling very nefarious in this. And, Russia pops up a little bit in the UN, and I'm just not sure where everybody's coming from. And then you throw in other major events like the UN secretary, the Secretary General of the UN's plane gets shot down. And that feels like a big moment in and of itself. And that's just kind of brushed over. That doesn't seem like something that should happen.
Right. Now, and what's interesting is now it does happen in the course of these events. And I think this is the perfect segue into the fact versus fiction section, but also to tie it in with one more thing that I think does this movie a disservice. And that is the characterization and the handling of who is called General Sambe in the movie. And to kind of speak toward how accurate is this? We talked about the siege elements themselves being highly accurate. But in terms of the other exterior context, it really plays Sambe and this whole situation in Congo as this stereotypical, African warlord coup, right?
Yeah.
So we open up with General Sambe kidnapping, which again, you don't even really have the context as to who this person is.
And I don't think I realized this until my second watch through who this guy was.
Right. So this is the president of the Congo, or the prime minister of the Congo. I forget exactly what the title is. Yep. And he is kidnapped by Sambe, who takes him into a gross little, ramshackle underground lair, and has his Belgian, Colonel Sanders minion execute him so that he can take control. That's not how that plays out, right? Yep. So now he does have him kidnapped. He's held for months and then is executed by firing squad. We'll get to why that's an important tidbit in just a second. Yep. Additionally, they show the Secretary General of the UN's plane going down. The implication is that it goes down in the Congo and is ordered to be shot down by General Sambe.
Yep.
We see the jet pull in behind it, et cetera, et cetera. There is no evidence that happened. In fact, the Secretary General's plane, which did go down, went down in Rhodesia, not in the Congo. There has never been any evidence that it was shot down, certainly not by a plane. It has always been unclear as to why it went down, because I think not enough was discovered or found in order to make a definitive solution. I am not saying that it didn't happen, right? Because all that maybe has, some nefarious things, it certainly alludes to that.
Yeah.
But to really go hard into, there's a scene, it cuts to when that happens, you see the fighter jet pull in behind it, the plane goes down, and then it cuts to Sambe immediately, and he's like, let's see what you do now. Right? Yeah. It made it really sound like he was the hand that moved that into happening. And that's just not necessarily the case. Lastly, General Sambe, he is not a general. Now, that doesn't mean he wouldn't assume that title, right? But he didn't. He never served in the military. He was never a general. At no point during his coup for power did he ever refer to himself as General Sambe. Yeah. In fact, he only ever called himself President Sambe, or primary president, whatever the title was, but eventually just president. And that is important because all of these things play together to really oversimplify the narrative that this is just some other African warlord seizing power from a democracy, to become his own dictator, and not the case at all. This is actually a political coup, a political maneuver, a political civil war amongst two politicians who differ to the point where one of them is just trying to seize power. Now, yes, that's a militaristic approach and whatever. But again, like, why oversimplify it and pander to this stereotype that African nations are only capable of these warlord guerrilla tactics, when in reality, this was a very thought out, meticulous, and meticulously executed plot of one government against another, akin to our own Civil War. Like, we wouldn't say that, the Confederate forces were, these jungle warlords who come in. Right. No, like, this was a planned and established secession.
And his depiction in the movie even contradicts his categorization or his identification as a general, right? Like, when you think of an African warlord, I'm thinking more like military fatigues, more like the soldiers, right, that you saw fighting in the battles, right? Military fatigues, maybe wearing a bunch of ammo belts or something like that, being a little bit more violent. He's not. He's very much a politician. He's very charismatic, as I said. He's very well spoken. He's not violent. We never really see him. I don't think we see him get violent at all. So
except when he orders the execution of the president,
but he's not perpetuating violence from his own two fists, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like, he's not. He's not doing it. I just did not. I struggled with him, with that character. Why call him a general, right? Like, I don't.
Even the meeting when he meets with Mark Strong's character, they do this one-on-one, and the movie even puts you in a place where you think, like, dude, Mark Strong is going to get killed because he's going to go meet this warlord guy,
right?
And the meeting is actually eerily diplomatic in the sense of, like, here's what I want. Okay, you're not willing to do that. Well, here's what you've done. I'm going to keep right. It's all very political.
The fact that the Irish soldiers are not executed on sight after killing 300 of his loyalist soldiers and French mercenaries. The fact that they're allowed to remain in jail. Because ultimately, there's feelings that this whole thing was a ploy, right? Like, they wanted to capture them, they never wanted to kill them, as they wanted to use them as political pawns, right, to get their own guys back or to get leverage against the UN forces. So,
enough of that just isn't made clear.
Yeah.
And exactly. I think, and so with all that in mind, right, I think you can start to understand why critics maybe didn't give this as high a rating as one would expect, simply because while this movie gorgeously executes one aspect of it, it really falls short in the other, two-thirds, which doesn't sound like much, a third of a movie, but that's substantial when you're talking about a 3-act structure. And, and so I think that this is... I will say this, and I will end with this, right? Mm-hmm. I think, again, you can understand where the critics are coming from, because I think they make a valid point. Perhaps they're seeing this as, like, a very well-executed war drama. Mm-hmm. Well, no. It's a very well-executed battle sequence, but a poorly executed overall wartime drama. Because the drama falls short because you're not really setting that stage. I will say this. This movie, achieves and accomplishes its primary goal, even if it's at the expense of a almost as important secondary goal. But that primary storyline is so compelling, so riveting, so incredibly and beautifully acted, so you are so invested and totally just you are sucked in to this horrific injustice that was done to these soldiers, that it more than makes up for the shortcomings of the other elements we just discussed. And arguably, I think it teeters the scales in favor of the movie enough that this is an excellent watch. So critics give it a 64%. I would err much higher and much closer to the audience score, which I believe to be more accurate of the film overall. And I'd give this movie a 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would agree. So let's pull it home with a little, fact versus fiction.
I thought I just did that, Tim.
Did we officially touch on all that?
I don't know. What did we miss? What else?
So let's just hammer that point home. Let's be clear. We mentioned all of this was pulled from the logs, right?
Right.
So a lot of this, and I find it funny that one of the reviews says that the dialogue was cliche. Well, I'm guessing a lot of that dialogue is maybe not so cliche. It's
cliche slash just how people talk in these situations. Yeah.
In regards to the actual siege, I listened to a podcast where they interviewed some of these guys, some of the soldiers, and they are, this was pre-movie, but, based on what they were saying, spot on, down to, the timing of everything and how things played out. A little, we talked about Shanbei not being a general, the whole plane crash. The plane didn't even crash until the day after the siege had ended. It was either right after they surrendered or thereafter, but not at any part affecting this. There is some reports that they did try to send more reinforcements than we see in the movie sent to the front, significantly more, but they're just never able to make it because they were repulsed, and they had to really, there's this one bridge that if was well defended, nobody could get over it. We see that play out a little bit in the movie, but we're led to believe that they only ever attempted to send them 30 men, but it sounds like it was
smattering.
It sounds like they tried to send them at different times upwards of 300 men, a mix of other forces that were not just Irish, but including Indian and Swedish, I think, as well.
Well, and there was also, it wasn't made clear in the movie, but when the Irish troops did arrive at Jadotville, like that day, there were 2 other companies of soldiers at that outpost, and they, for unknown reasons to this day, were pulled out, and only the 157 were sent back in.
Yeah.
So, again, if they are comparable in number, right, we should have been, pushing 500 men at the Siege of Jadotville when really we were only at 157.
Yeah. So ultimately, because of the fact that this movie was made really in major part to, tell their story and exonerate these men and get them the recognition that they deserved, this movie's pretty much spot on, a little bit of license. Sure. And again, ultimately, I argue that we could have Hollywoodized it a little bit, given it a little bit more padding, maybe built up a little bit of that drama, because we, as we illustrated, it does sort of fizzle out. Even the surrender sort of feels anticlimactic. I really felt like we're building to that last big hurrah. And then Quinlan's like, who wants to keep fighting? And they're like, we do. And he goes, good thing you don't make the decisions. We're done.
Right.
And I'm like, what? That's it? Like, it's over? I really, I was surprised that was it. I was a little disappointed. Not that I want, that is the story, and I want them to tell the story. But in certain ways, we've seen it play out with other movies. I think you could have added a little bit to it, but ultimately, for their purpose, this movie is a huge success.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. What do you give it?
I would stick with you on that. I'd go 7 out of 10. I love it. I watched it again.
Oh, I gave it a 7.5.
7.5. Oh, okay, I'll go with that. I couldn't find anything at fault, and it's I feel nitpicky in a way, pulling at the things that I did, but that would mean I'm not doing my job, in reviewing this movie.
Yeah.
It's an easy watch, right? At the end of the day, if we are saying you're looking, it's an interesting thing to say that, right? At the end of the day, if we're telling you something to watch tonight, I think it's an easy watch, as in, like, it doesn't really take a lot of effort. It elicits a lot of emotion in me.
Right.
But it's a quick watch. The movie moves quick. Nobody you like dies. So you don't have to suffer through that, right? No horrible deaths. And it's, I hate to say fun, but it's a remarkable story, and it's a pleasure to watch this story and see what these men did. And it's truly remarkable. I was really jacked up after watching. I was really angry that they were put through this, but I'm just blown away by their ability and fortitude and luck to get through this. I think that's made evident throughout a couple times where a couple mortars didn't go off that would have changed the tide of this for sure. Mm-hmm. But it's something you could put on maybe a Sunday afternoon if you're looking for a movie to watch, something different. Definitely worth a watch, 100%.
Yeah, but definitely make sure you're ready to feel some things. And I think, right, and the criticisms that I laid out, if anything, is just an indication of I just wish I had more. I just wanted more. And yes, that is certainly a bit of a negative, right? Because it in a way leaves you wanting more, but at the same time, this movie is so amazing it leaves you wanting more. And I think it's not necessarily a good problem to have, because you don't really want a problem like this where you feel like a third of the movie is not really flushed out. But at the same time, like, if what you're doing is leaving people saying, man, I wish they had just given me more, then, you leave them wanting a little bit. Mission accomplished, right? So, it is, it's a stunning film. It's an incredible story. It's beautifully acted. It's mostly well written, and it's an absolute must watch for me. So go to Netflix and check it out.
Give me some more, deep cuts, some more war stories like this. I'm done retreading, the major stuff. Find more stuff like this.
Yeah, the major stuff. Yeah. No, I can't watch, World War II stuff one more time.
No more.
All right, guys. Well, that pretty much wraps us up here, and relatively close to the hour mark, which is always a win. What else? As always, guys, you can check us out on the website, pausereviews.com, hosted by Podbean, where you can get all of our episodes, as well as links to all the libraries that we're in. But, of course, you can always find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can shoot us an email, pausereviews@gmail.com. And hit us up on Instagram. You can shoot us DMs. You can comment on our posts. You can comment on our episode releases. Let us know what you're thinking, what you think about the episode, any questions you have, anything we missed, recommendations, all that stuff. We want to do all of this to spark that dialogue with you guys and give you guys a safe place to come and talk to two other movie nerds who aren't going to laugh you out the room like your wife does, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Feels too close to home.
Or look at you sideways when you're trying to explain the greater geopolitical movements surrounding a war movie that's not about any actual war.
That's so fair. Safe place, guys. It's a safe space. So hit us up on Instagram @pausedreviews. As always, love doing this. Love being here with you guys. Join us next week for Instagram Live and every Thursday after that for brand new episodes of the Pause Reviews podcast. As always, I'm your boy Frank.
This is Tim.
We will catch you on the next one. Until then, my friends, be safe, have fun, and enjoy that movie.
Sweet.
Yeah. See ya.